Hi, welcome back out to the channel. Today we're going to talk about something a little bit unique, which is sepsis. And its common name is blood poisoning. Well, since I've been back in clinic, which is only a couple months, I actually know of multiple cases of sepsis, and that's unusual for me. So I had to reach out to some of my Western medical providers and ask, hey, are you guys seeing more sepsis? Do you think you might be seeing more sepsis? And their feedback was, yeah, it seems like there is more sepsis going on right now. So in order to help you better manage your health, let's talk a little bit about what got these people into ER and diagnosed with sepsis. Let's look at some of their blood work so that you can understand more what the blood work might look like. And you can also think about when you might be a little bit more concerned and want to kind of push for more tests for yourself or for someone you love. Hi, my name's Kim. I'm a licensed and nationally certified Chinese medical provider and a Taoist practitioner. Today, we're going to go deep on sepsis. It's common name blood poisoning. So let's get started. What is sepsis? You and I might have heard of sepsis. Its common name is blood poisoning, and it is a serious, life-threatening infection that can lead to death. Okay, so not every infection leads to sepsis. In fact, not many do. And if you haven't heard of sepsis previously, that kind of shows you that it's not really common. And you've probably had a lot of infections in your life and not had any sepsis. So it's not common for an infection to lead to sepsis. So what happens when it does lead to sepsis is the infection becomes so severe that it overwhelms the body, and it leads to one or more organ failures that can lead to death. So even with treatment, it can lead to death. And of those patients that are hospitalized with a diagnosis of sepsis or blood poisoning, 1 out of 3 will pass. It's really a serious infection. Sepsis used to be defined as this inflammatory response throughout the body. So unlike a bladder infection where it's just in the bladder, or cellulitis of the lower limbs, which is just in your lower legs, or, a cut on your finger where the infection's just in your finger, this was inflammation throughout the body. And then in 2016, they changed the definition just a little bit to say that sepsis is a life-threatening organ dysfunction caused by a dysregulated host response to infection. Now, that was a lot of really big words, and I really couldn't wrap my head around it. But what they meant is that one or more of your body's organs malfunction because of some uncontrolled immune response to some sort of infection. And these organs, they can fail. And the more that fail, the higher the likelihood of you're not being able to survive this. And again, of people hospitalized with sepsis, in general, 1 out of 3 will not survive a septic infection. What causes sepsis? Because if you know what causes it, is it something that you can avoid? Well, here it is. The most common causes of sepsis are going to be bacteria, fungi, or viruses. And out of all of those, the most common is going to be bacteria, followed by fungi, and then followed by viruses. And these infections, they can start anywhere, but most commonly they start in the lungs. And if you think about that, pneumonia, bacterial infection through pneumonia, or in the bladder, another common one, or in the stomach. If it's caused by something other than bacteria, viruses, or fungi, it's called a non-infectious insult. And that is the absolute least common type of sepsis. So what would be a non-infectious insult? Well, that would be trauma. Sometimes car accidents with multiple traumatic injuries, or burns are another one. chronic diseases can also cause sepsis. Pancreatitis is a real common one that can do that. But these non-infectious insults, these things that are not bacteria, that are not fungi, and that are not viruses, that is the least common type of sepsis out there. And you rarely see any studies on that because it's so uncommon. The next thing that we're going to want to know is, what's the mortality with sepsis? And in 2000, out of all cases of sepsis, so hospitalized and non-hospitalized, the death rate was about 18%. Now, we know that on those that are hospitalized, it's 1 in 3. And, the numbers over the last few years have included COVID. So whatever those numbers are, that might not be a good comparison because, there was a lot of sepsis with COVID. And so if we look at sepsis historically, so before COVID, so historically, the patients who had sepsis, they could return to their normal life. Yet there has been studies that show that, the patients that have experienced severe sepsis, their immune system seems to be impaired. They're more susceptible to other medical conditions. And even several years after their experience with sepsis, they can experience more medical issues and even death. I don't usually see patients with sepsis. In the United States, maybe about 1.7 million individuals are diagnosed with sepsis annually. And that comes out to a 0.5 percentage point of the population of the United States. And of that 0.5 percentage point of the population, only 45% of that is hospitalized. So something like 0.25% of the population of the United States is hospitalized with sepsis. So when I got back into clinic, and within a 1-month period, I'm exposed to multiple individuals who have been hospitalized with sepsis. That's kind of an unusual event for me. That doesn't really happen. I mean, if this was statistics, that would definitely be an outlier event, and it really took me by surprise. Let's talk about what got them to go to ER. So back in October, November, this bronchitis thing started going around, right? And it was like some sort of flu, some sort of cold. And it was a really serious bronchitis, right? For some people, it was really almost impossible to get over. And some of my clients were going to their doctor to see if they could get help from it. And their tests wouldn't come back with anything. They wouldn't test for the flu. They wouldn't test for COVID. They wouldn't test for strep, and they wouldn't test for pneumonia. So it kind of left, I think it kind of left the medical community somewhat baffled because they had serious symptoms of some sort of bronchial infection. And so what they were doing the doctors were prescribing high doses of antibiotics, and that seemed to finally arrest this really severe bronchitis that some people were experiencing. I didn't think anything of it at the time because let's be real, we've been experiencing wave after wave after wave of new variants, and all of them have had some sort of crazy severity to them. So, you just kind of start numbing out to the whole thing. And the thing that was different with this is, that bronchitis, it was sticking around. I mean, when I got back into clinic in March, April, and May, that bronchitis was still around, and there were still kids that were experiencing it. So then something weird happened. One of my clients came in and they really looked, I knew something really wrong had happened. And so I asked them what was going on. And I had been back in clinic just a couple weeks. And what they told me was that their high school daughter, is in ICU on a ventilator and that she was diagnosed with sepsis. And so for me, I asked, what went on with that? And she had that bronchitis thing. I mean, the whole family had gotten the bronchitis thing, right? So everybody else had gotten over it. It was her and her younger brother who hadn't gotten over it. Her younger brother was getting over it, but she just couldn't get over it. And she was experiencing more symptoms, shortness of breath, dizziness. And so they took her into ER, and what they found was that she was septic. Okay, so there was one. And then there was another person, another one of my clients. And, this happened in January. So this happened early on in the year. And same thing, had experienced that bronchitis thing that was going around. Same thing, didn't test for anything. And then because it got so bad, and he was already severely immune compromised, because it got so bad, they went to ER, and in ER they found out that he was septic, and he too was hospitalized. So that weird bronchitis thing, what it was is they couldn't get rid of it. It continued to seem to progress. It continued to cause weird symptoms like shortness of breath, dizziness, loss of balance, vertigo. So that's what got them into ER. I want to thank my clients because they not only allowed me access to their medical documents, they also allowed me to share this information with you so that you can be more aware of things that might be happening and that might impact you or your family or people that you love. I want to talk about the blood work because I think there's some things that both you and I can learn from this and that can help us as we're trying to navigate our own health and some of this weirdness that's going on today with health symptoms, that maybe we can better help manage our health. What's a comprehensive metabolic panel? Well, every year that you go get your annual from your doctor, that's one of the tests that you get. And what it does is it measures 14 different substances in your blood. When you're looking at this in sepsis, there's going to be 3 areas that can get out of balance. And that's going to be your electrolytes, that's going to be glucose, and that's going to be your liver enzymes. So when we look at electrolytes usually get used up. So they usually go low. And that's going to be your sodium, your potassium, and your chloride. Glucose has a tendency to go high because that is one of the ways that the body protects itself. And then liver enzymes have a tendency to go high too. And liver enzymes, along with additional tests that we can talk about next, can be an early indicator of sepsis risk. So the liver enzymes going off would be your first indicator. This is for a really specific disease, right? This is for sepsis. And so every time your liver enzymes go off, that doesn't mean that you have sepsis, because liver enzymes go off in Hep C, they go off in fatty liver disease, they go off with gallbladder disease. So there's a lot of reasons why your liver enzymes can be off or why your glucose may be high. But if you're sporting a fever right now, that fever is a low-grade fever that's been going on for a long time. If you've been feeling like you've been sick and you just can't get over it, or something sitting on your chest, this would be a good thing to go in and get pulled so that you can get a start of where you are in your health. There's another test that I'm seeing a lot of lately, and that's going to be a lactate test. Now, lactate, it's different than lactic acid. It sounds the same, but it's different. It's a chemical that's naturally produced in the body, and what it does is it fuels cells during times of stress, and you're going to find that it's elevated in things like sepsis. So this is another tool to diagnose sepsis. You can see that their range is high. So any high range on your lactate test is another indication that you may have sepsis. Now, there's other things that are going to point to you probably having sepsis, and that's if you have a fever, even a slight fever, your heart rate. If your heart rate is over 90 beats per minute, if your respiration is greater than 20 breaths per minute, if you're experiencing some confusion. Have you seen a pulse ox? Because a pulse ox, you can measure your oxygen saturation on your finger. And if that's under 90%, and then if you're taking your blood pressure, your systolic blood pressure, the top number, if that's lower than 90. So those are additional things that can be impacted with sepsis. You don't have to have them all. You just might have a couple of them. And why I bring this up is because the doctors, they're really overwhelmed right now. So if you go in and you find that your comprehensive metabolic panel, if that panel's off, and you're experiencing some of these other symptoms that can be indicative of sepsis, then you might want to ask them to do a lactate test. And I am more than positive that they're not going to have a problem with that because they're overwhelmed right now. And so any help from their patients can be super helpful for everybody. Today, I think it's so important to really acknowledge that you have to be your own patient advocate. And if you're showing things off on your comprehensive metabolic panel, like your glucose, your electrolytes, or your enzymes, and you're showing a positive lactate test, then it's really important to advocate that you're not allowed to leave the hospital until all those things are back into balance. If your doctor is suggesting that you leave the ER, then you might want to just ask them, why does that make sense? And then, kind of go over, okay, the 3 critical areas in sepsis: electrolytes, glucose, liver enzymes. And then we have a positive lactate test. I'm feeling horrible. Here's some other symptoms. Why do you think that makes sense that I should go home? Why I wanted to show you the white blood cell report is because the neutrophils are high. And this isn't the first time that I've seen a high neutrophil count. I've seen it in another blood result, and nobody can tell me why the neutrophils are high. So that's just a mystery there. There has been some recent research that I am going over in my members only area. So if you want to see some of the recent research on why the neutrophil counts might be high, then click on the link in the video description below that will take you to my members only area, or there's a link up here in the corner, or there is going to be a link at the end of this video. It's a great way to help you navigate through some of the weirdness that's going on today. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about with this sepsis is that the people are testing negative for the flu. They're testing negative for COVID. They're testing negative for pneumonia. They're testing negative for strep throat. And if you do just basic x-rays, those x-rays will not be remarkable. That means this sepsis is a little bit confusing and a little bit unpredictable. And if it's confusing, then you having as much information as you can so that you can be your own advocate or an advocate for someone that you love is going to be really important as you learn how to partner with your doctor. I think one of the key takeaways that I'm taking from this is that your blood work is not indicative of your health. And it seems like maybe there's something new, something that's outside what we've normally known in medicine, because I think everybody's overwhelmed right now. I know that, just trying to get into your Western doctor right now is almost impossible because there's so many weird things going on with people's health right now. And so the other thing that I know, though, is that they are overwhelmed. Your doctors are overwhelmed, so that if you feel that maybe something else might be going on, if you ask them to do another test just to make sure, they usually don't have a problem with that because it's overwhelming right now. The most critical part of treating sepsis is speed. The earlier you can catch it, the higher your survival rate. In fact, every hour that you wait, your survival rate decreases. So it changes really quick with sepsis. Okay, so until next time, I will catch you on the other side.